Welcome to A Word on Cybersecurity for the week of April 10th, 2022. This is episode number 3, and I'm your host, Curt Franklin, Senior Analyst at Omdia. Today, I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Principal Analyst Tanner Johnson. Tanner, welcome to A Word on Cybersecurity.
Thank you for having me, Curt. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, if you haven't been here before, what we do is break the week in cybersecurity down to one word, one pithy, marvelous, magical word that somehow encapsulates everything that's been going on. And because we want to make sure you're getting plenty of value for your time, we don't limit it to just one, because Tanner and I each choose our own word. Now, we have not shared our word with one another, so I suppose it's possible that we will choose the very same word. You're just going to have to watch and find out. So, Tanner, tell me, first of all, what do you think about the week? Has this been a particularly active week in cybersecurity from your point of view?
Any week, if you look hard enough, is going to find some major activity when it comes to security issues. One of the projects I'm working on is scouring for the various vulnerabilities that occurred last year and looking at the NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, their CVE list, and doing kind of some cross-referencing there, and the sheer volume of vulnerabilities this year, or sorry, for 2021, was over, it's about 3,500 more documented vulnerabilities than over the previous year. So we're just definitely seeing an uptick, absolutely, in the sheer volume of those vulnerabilities.
Well, that volume is something that actually I'm going to bring back up when I'm talking about my word, but I've got to ask, what's your word on cybersecurity for this week?
Well, I have to cheat, and I have to use two words simply for the alliteration component. Digital diligence is what I'm saying mine is, because the sheer I see diligence as basically that the cognizance required to be aware of your own ecosystem, how you interact with the rest of the world, and how the rest of the world interacts with you, and the risks associated with it. So, seeing organizations either be cognizant or basically negligent when it comes to their digital diligence is what we see when it comes to the responses and the threat activity that has occurred in the last week. So I see organizations and individuals, when it comes as a focus on data security, I see organizations and individuals having three basic options when it comes to their strategies. They can do things quick, they can do things cheap, or they can do things securely. And often security is the first thing on the chopping block, sadly, because organizations want their products out yesterday with zero overhead attached. So as a result of that, that is the antithesis of digital diligence, the being aware of your own impact. And sadly, the number of security vendors that are out there that provide comprehensive data protection is staggering. That I think was at Black Hat last year. I think it was we're approaching 6,000 vendors in the cybersecurity space and growing. So keeping tabs on that is pretty entertaining. But the challenge just being that when it comes to your own data, your organization's data, no one is going to be as good a steward of your data as you will be. You have a vested interest in protecting your data, and you have an interest that supersedes any third-party vendor. So making sure you have policy compliance requirements, outline plans for disaster response, or in the event of ransomware or other particular threats, that you have that digital diligence required to understand where your responsibilities lie, where other organizations, where their responsibilities lie when managing your data or managing the ecosystem that your data resides in. So these are some significant challenges, and they seem to kind of linger week to week, but we do see more examples of either the lax approach of it, or the successful deployment and prevention of breaches as a result.
I want to bring up a couple of things that you mentioned in there. And one of them is this notion of visibility. It seems like this is a consistent issue that CIOs, CISOs, program managers, even dev managers don't have a good, accurate picture of what's going on inside their own network.
Absolutely.
And, the question that I have, and I ask this of a lot of people, why? Why is it so hard to know what's going on in your network?
I think a good portion of it is just the sheer volume of data created and by any organization on a regular business day. There's even data that's autonomously generated is staggering. So the challenge also is that between on-premises, off-premises, hybrid cloud deployments, differential network segmentation, your data can be in thousands of locations simultaneously. It's up to the organization security personnel to be aware of where these crown jewels reside so that you can continue business operations. You can continue, to respond to and address and adapt as needed to the challenges that arise. But visibility is the cornerstone of security. You cannot begin to provide any kind of protection whatsoever of any entity that you are unaware that exists. That's the biggest challenge I think many organizations have, is isolating and locating exactly what are your crown jewels. What is the data repositories that are essential for you to conduct business on a daily basis, and what steps are you taking to protect that once you are aware? But visibility is still something that many organizations are unfortunately lacking, and it is something that requires considerable effort. I think one of the bigger challenges also when it comes to security is that the return on investment is something that is challenging to see immediately upon the procurement of any kind of data security or data visibility or location classification solution. It's easy to articulate the benefit, but when it comes to the financial dollar bills that you're trying to ultimately convince the board of, this is something that's not going to have immediate return that is going to be able to be provided as significant metrics to support. So that's the bigger challenge I see.
We'll come back to that, but you mentioned things like cloud services, SaaS, all of these things that basically are running on someone else's computer.
Pretty much, yeah.
I've been talking a lot with people about this notion of third-party risk. Basically, the risk that comes into your organization courtesy of one of your suppliers.
Precisely.
Whether that's in the guise of a cloud service or a cloud application or a library.
Right.
People get very wrapped up in the idea of open source libraries that they're using. And let's admit it, every organization uses open source libraries. It's just, especially if you're any sort of agile or agile-ish development methodology, you can't do it without some open source libraries. And there's a word that's used, dependency.
Yes.
And, for those who don't know it, dependency means you may be dependent on a particular piece of code, but they may have used other code to make their thing, and so on and so forth, all the way down. In one sense, it's nothing but turtles all the way down. So let me ask you, since you brought up the word diligence, how many of those turtles do you need to inspect with your own corporate eyes to be able to say you have been diligent? In legal terms, that you have practiced due diligence in assessing your risk?
I think that's a very good question. It's a difficult question to apply because it's not a one size fits all for every organization. The requirements, the compliance demands, the regulatory demands of individual organizations are going to vary based upon the market that they serve. And so, a HR firm or IT firm is going to have different requirements than a doctor's office when it comes to the handling of user information, especially patient information. So it's basically going to be determined by the organization itself. What level of risk are you willing to accept by not going down and checking every single one of those turtles in the line? So there is inherent risk adopted when, like I mentioned, when it comes to the being a good steward of your own data. You are going to be the best. But you are ultimately going to possibly require assistance from these third-party vendors that have this infrastructure in place that you can utilize and provide, are able to depend upon to provide guidance for your own organization going forward. But it is something that I think each organization needs to sit down and establish, and that's the importance of establishing a defense posture, a security posture. You need to know exactly what levels of risk are acceptable, and have it be something that is understood across all personnel. Security is a challenging situation, and the weakest link in the chain is ultimately going to be the one that brings down or ultimately going to be the one that's ultimately targeted and results in a compromise. So that is going to boil down to individual acceptance, acknowledgement, and a personal choice based upon that organization.
Well, you mentioned a little while ago the idea of justifying the dollars that go into cybersecurity, and often cybersecurity is seen as nothing but a cost, and therefore, if we're going to try and cut our way to profitability, things like security get chopped.
Frequently,
But we have also heard a lot of people talk about this idea of risk quantification. And usually that's, taking risk from a notion of high, medium, low to putting some sort of number on it within a framework and ultimately tying that number to dollars. Usually in terms of, if we can make our risk number better, we can save X number of dollars in insurance costs, in remediation costs, in something.
Sure.
Now, let me ask you, are you hearing people talk about risk quantification? And if you are you hearing them talk about it in any sort of consistent way?
I am hearing them talk about getting actual metrics behind risk and then dollar signs associated with it. But when it comes to the application or developing some kind of standardized approach, that ultimately is the challenge, linking back to the previous question of no one size fits all solution. There are standardized approach, but the problem is organizations, when you have those standards, they think that because they're in compliance, that means they're secure. And sadly, compliance and security are not the same in any sense of the word. So the reliance upon that simply being compliant, it's like, okay, you've met the minimum standard, the absolute minimum requirements, the legal obligation, that's all you've met. So there are many other steps, many other requirements that need to be met ahead of time. But this is something that is going to be will need to be established and directed upon by senior management to understand exactly what level of ignorance are we willing to accept, what level of value associated with this potential risk are we willing to acknowledge as reasonable, as logical, as rational. That's the ultimate approach that has to be taken. But when it comes to the quantification of that risk, if any organization isn't engaging in it, they're falling behind the curve.
Yeah, my experience echoes yours in that you hear a lot of people talking about it, and it seems like every vendor that has a product that helps you quantify risk has their own scale, has
Yes.
their own quantification regime. There are a few organizations out there that have put forth things. FAIR is one of them that has a framework for risk and all of that, but they're not widely adopted. And to me, one of the big problems with this is that it's tough to do any sort of benchmarking of your organization against the others in your market sector. You can get a sense of your comfort level with risk, but it's very difficult to know whether your comfort level is consistent with the comfort level of the others in your market sector.
Precisely.
And without that, until disaster befalls you or one of your marketplace compatriots, it's hard to know where you stand. So, the good news is that this gives us, people in our jobs, lots to talk about. And so I do appreciate the job security that comes from this. But
Absolutely.
it's not as useful as it might be. And I suspect that this is the sort of thing we're going to see more and more companies trying to do as time goes forward. Well, I want to give you my word for the week,
Please
and
do.
I will say that my word changed today. I had been going along the last couple of days thinking that I was going to use a word kind of like vulnerability or holes, because there really have been just a bunch vulnerabilities announced in the past few days. And these have been vulnerabilities across the spectrum in operating systems, in applications, for
Networking components.
networking components, routers. There have been several router vendors who have announced holes. But then today I was reading around doing my morning research, and comes word that the FBI has firmly affixed blame for a March 23rd theft, which is the largest cryptocurrency theft so far. It happened in Ethereum. It was the currency, and it's the Ronin blockchain. And the thieves made off with roughly $625 million worth of this stuff. Now, according to the FBI, we now know that we're looking at a group out of North Korea. And this has to surprise approximately no one.
No.
Um, and they figured out, because they're being helped by another group. You know, you've got APT 38, that it looks like was the shadowy group behind the theft, and the Lazarus group, another shadowy group, because, you know, if you are global bad guys, you can't have enough shadowy groups under your umbrella. But they're helping to go through and help launder this through a blender or a mixer. And I'm looking at the name of it. Tornado Cash
Popular one.
is the name, which seems like it should be sitting on a street corner downtown cashing checks. But instead, they do this mixing and blending activity. And again, for the people watching or listening who don't know about this, this is where you take a bunch of different transactions from you and a lot of other individuals, throw them in a big pot, mix them around, and spit out usually a different cryptocurrency. And in this whole mixing and spitting out process, it becomes essentially impossible to tell which input led
Mhm.
to which precise output. And so it's a fabulous money laundering scheme, aided and abetted by the characteristics of cryptocurrency. Uh, Tanner, let me ask, first of all, were you aware of any of this going into this week?
Uh, it- this was something I just discovered in the last day or two doing some research myself, but I'm not surprised by this at all. Um, there are estimates that vacillate between 60 and 70%, but that's the amount estimated of North Korea's GDP that is tied to ransomware campaigns. So these kind of actions don't surprise me at all. And the challenges associated with it is, yes, the transactions can be reverse engineered. It is possible. It just takes an enormous amount of resources to do so that ultimately makes the effort negligible. Or more costly than the actual ransom or the actual theft itself, to conduct this long-term reverse engineering of these trillions of transactions that the blender has allowed. So I'm not surprised in the least that this is taking place, and I expect more similar actions from this, because these are, Russia, North Korea, these entities. Nothing occurs without at least tacit acknowledgement from the government, if not outright support and nation state sponsoring. So these kind of activities are unfortunate, but it just highlights the additional need for greater security when it comes to these kind of cryptocurrency exchanges.
Yeah, it's interesting because North Korea has been at the heart of most of these big thefts. Lazarus Group is acknowledged to have stolen somewhere north of $1 billion worth of cryptocurrency over the past few years, largely because the economic sanctions that have been levied on the country keep them from doing a lot of, normal above board trade to earn money,
Legitimate business.
legitimate business. And so I think it is not unreasonable to imagine that they will be joined by groups from Russia, Cozy Bear and all the other bear groups
Right, right.
uh, that have thus far spent most of their time trying to disrupt critical infrastructure in various places, might well turn some of their attention to profit making ventures. Now, it's interesting. Actually, Tanner, you told me this first. This theft came about in a game called Axie Infinity, which is an NFT based game. Um, this is one of those things. It's a play to earn model, um, but to me, one of the interesting things is that in all of this, and all of these are first of all blockchain based activities, NFTs and cryptocurrencies. They all tout the inherent security of the currency or the thing
Blockchain.
itself, the blockchain. Um, I'm surprised that Ronan apparently didn't
Hmm.
notice that this had happened for 6 days. One of the
That's
terms
huge.
that's enormous. And it's one of the terms that we use in the industry. It's called dwell time. Dwell time is the period of time that elapses between when something happens and when the victim recognizes that it's happened. And there are, again, a lot of companies out there that sell products that are aimed at reducing the dwell time. Ideally, it would be a matter of seconds. To be brutally honest, if most companies could measure it in hours, they would be thrilled.
Hmm.
Um, some of the very notable things in the past have been measured in months. Sony,
Months. Yeah.
yeah, is the big one, where I think it was around 14 months before they figured out that someone had made off with most of their corporate data, including lots of movies that hadn't been released and things like that.
Was it
Uh,
Experian or Equifax? I want to get it right. The was another breach with one of the credit bureaus back in like 2017, 2018, I believe. There was basically every working American adult's information was part of a breach, and yeah, it's just staggering the amount of information available and accessible via these disclosures.
that was, I believe, Equifax, and again, that was one where it was not a short dwell time.
Oh, I think 8 months, I think, is how long from between the actual breach to the discovery that the hole existed.
Yeah, one of the tactics the threat actors use to stay below the radar is that they sort of dribble the data out. They don't try to take gigabytes of data in a chunk. They take it in a very slow, steady stream, so that on things like log files, it kind of gets lost in the clutter of things like email.
The
It's just,
chaff. Yeah.
and so this is an issue. So, Tanner, is this the sort of thing that's going to take some of the shine off of cryptocurrency? Or is this
Hmm.
just yet another thing where people look at it and go, stuff happens, and get on with trading NFTs and crypto money?
That's a really, really good question, and I think it boils down to individual tolerance. I mean, for the vast majority, cryptocurrency is a tool like any other capability. It's how it's utilized, it's how it's deployed, how the overall benefits impact, whether the individual or the organization itself benefits. But there are a lot of nuanced approaches to determine whether or not for an individual or an organization that to determine to see value and continue to see growth and opportunity in such a thing as cryptocurrency. So yes, all tools can be used maliciously and nefariously, without question. The challenge being if the good utilization of that, or the honorable utilization of that tool, outweighs the costs associated with the nefarious use cases. And that is a challenging balancing act that I think we're years away from really seeing substantive organizations to decide for themselves to determine if this is a risk they're willing to accept.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that cryptocurrency is one of those things that has happened where, as in so much in our industry, the technology raced well
Oh
ahead
yeah.
of regulation, and even, and this is a loaded word, but I will say morality, as you say, the proper, the accepted, the socially accepted use of a particular technology. Now we have things like various governments
Mm-hmm.
looking at issuing cryptocurrency, including the US government. I know is studying the question of whether it should be done, could be done. Other governments around the world are doing the same thing. It will be fascinating to see whether the standardization of cryptocurrency makes it more popular or less popular. And again, I think that's going to depend heavily on the individual,
Yep.
because there are some who see the outlaw nature as a bug, and some who see it as a feature.
Feature. Right. Precisely. No, I agree with you entirely. There's inherent risk with any investment. So the challenge being, this is something that is new. We've seen it explode over the last decade plus, and that's what has allowed the facilitation of a lot of cyber crime. You have the ability to incorporate anonymous or nearly anonymous payments. Additional steps can be taken to basically digitally money launder your cryptocurrency to accomplish all sorts of nefarious deeds. But it is definitely something, I think, where organizations in the international community as a whole are really starting to take additional focus on to determine the validity and the stability for themselves, to determine if this is something they're willing to incorporate into their own economic systems. So I applaud those organizations and entities that are progressive enough to adopt the technology. And I think they're going to be kind of at the forefront. They're going to be the kind of the litmus test to see how truly viable this is. But I'm really excited to see what takes place in the next 18 months, 24 months.
Well, Tanner, hard as it is to believe, we're coming down close to the end of the time here for the live stream. So let me ask, do you have any things coming up in the next week or two that people should know about? People might want to follow you on any of the social networks, or you have something coming out? What you got going?
Well, as a data security analyst, I focus on securing information, digital information, and the biggest solutions we have involve obfuscation, encryption, tokenization, masking of data in some form. But the solutions we've relied upon, that the infrastructure and the internet is built upon, is going to be kind of negated through quantum-proof capabilities or quantum encryption solutions. You incorporate quantum computing, the functionality of superpositioning, and you increase the computational power exponentially. All of those these underlying encryption, the underlying protections are negated pretty quickly. So I'm writing reports, I'm doing research now to see how organizations are looking to incorporate a quantum-proof solution so that once quantum computing becomes commercially viable, which is not that far off. It's not that even the 10 years assumed, 5 years ago. It's coming. There are entities able to provide it now. It's exclusive because of cost. Cost is an exclusivity itself. So, but developing and doing research on that, I plan on writing reports on the evolution of the quantum capabilities and how organizations are deploying quantum-proof functions to protect themselves from this evolving solution.
Outstanding. Well, we will look forward to that. As for me, I'm continuing to work on cybersecurity awareness training. Have a big report coming out middle of the year, and a data asset where we look at the market and the numbers behind the market that'll be coming out in May. In addition, I have a piece on training as companies return to the office. That'll be going up on the Omdia site for our subscribers sometime in the next week. Got things planned for dark reading, and we're getting ready for our first foray back into real world events. The RSA conference is coming up in mid-June. I'll be there. I believe Tanner will be there. As a matter of fact, the entire Omdia Cybersecurity crew will be there. So if you're going to be there, let us know. We'd love to see if we can get together. Well, thank you for joining us here. Our words for this week: digital diligence for Tanner, huge for me. Let us know what your word is. Leave a note in the comments. Please plan to be back with us again next Friday, or whenever you view us in recorded fashion here on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on any of the other social networks. Well, for all of us here, I'm Curt Franklin. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Pleasure being here, Curt. Thank you.